the funny thing I learned, and I'd felt it about 6 months after living in Greece and serving at this parish, is I looked back at our church here in America, and I thought, this is the mission field. Sort of every priest, every pastoral assistant, every family has to be sort of drawing on God.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Path to the Priesthood, the podcast where we sit down with Greek Orthodox priests from around the country, and we ask them what it was that led them to ordained ministry in Christ's church. I'll be your host, Christo Pappademos. We have a very wonderful guest for you today, but before we meet him, let's hear a little bit about him. Father Michael Manos was born to Chris and Kathy Manos in 1989. He grew up at the Assumption Parish in St. Clair Shores and married Carrie Lynn in June of 2013. Father Michael and Presbytera Carrie currently have 4 children, Makarios, Alexi, Stephanos, and Panagis, or PJ. Father Michael completed an undergraduate degree in music and modern Greek studies and graduate degrees in theology and classics. He is currently writing a dissertation in applied linguistics at Aristotle University in Thessaloniki, Greece. Father Michael was ordained to the diaconate by Metropolitan Nicholas of Detroit on August 15th, 2015, on Panagis, very nice, and to the Holy Priesthood on September 27th of the same year. He was made a proto-presbyter by Metropolitan Amphilochios of Ganu and Hora in July of 2021. Father Michael has been blessed to serve as a priest in the metropolis of Detroit, the metropolis of Ganu and Hora in Turkey, and the metropolis of Thessaloniki in Greece. He has also had the joy of teaching the Greek language as an adjunct professor at Hellenic College Holy Cross in Brookline, Massachusetts. In August of 2024, Metropolitan Nicholas of Detroit assigned Father Michael to Assumption in St. Clair Shores. He, Presbytera Carrie, and their children are blessed to be in a parish that has been meaningful to them throughout their lives. Everybody, welcome Father Michael.
Thank you. It's nice to see you, Christo.
It's good to see you again. We were just catching up a little bit, and I think we were doing the math. It's been about, I don't know, about seven or so years since we've seen each other. We crossed paths briefly at Holy Cross, and even though we only overlapped for about a year, you were definitely one of those upperclassmen that made an impression on me. You know, always at the chant stand, kind of a quiet, humble leader of your classmates, and so it's a nice treat for me to see you again and to catch up and hear all about your path to the priesthood as well as your current journey in ministry.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm excited. I saw it, Christo Pappademos pop up on my phone, and I said, whatever he's asking, I know I'm going to say yes. So
I'm honored. Thanks, Father Michael. So we heard a lot in your bio there. There's a lot of interesting things to get into for sure. But why don't you take us back to the beginning, shall we say? Growing up in, I know, the metropolis of Detroit. Where's St. Clair Shores? What state was that?
St. Clair Shores is about it's Metro Detroit. It's
Oh, it
about
is.
25 minutes sort of down the lake from downtown Detroit. It's
Okay,
just
cool.
north of Detroit.
So Detroit, born and raised, and so what was
Yeah.
that like from an early age?
Um, yeah, I don't know that I like really thought about or understood my family as a child. And
Sure.
but I sort of, I guess, somewhat typical um childhood where I had some ethnic component.
Hmm.
My mother was sort of first generation. Her parents had come from Greece and started
Oh,
restaurants, so she grew up. That whole family was a big Greek sort of restaurant family. My father had also roots in Greece. He was maybe third or fourth generation. And so they, because of the restaurant on my mother's side, and because of my father, sort of the distance between him and an Orthodox country like Greece,
mhm.
uh, I my earliest memories of church were not in an Orthodox church. They're in a Presbyterian church. That's where
Oh,
my
wow.
parents were going. They'd met during college and sort of found a home at a Presbyterian church in downtown Detroit. And then when I was 5, they'd sort of returned to the Orthodox church, and
Wow.
so then I was received into the church, and I didn't have many Greek friends growing up, funnily enough. Um, so I knew the church as sort of the chant stand. First is the altar. I remember.
Ah,
I
yes.
remember very much the feeling of being in the altar. I remember sort of the voice of the priest, and I can sort of picture it now.
Yeah.
And and then later I got interested in chanting and things like that. But that was sort of funnily enough, I didn't realize this till I went to the seminary. I sort of knew just the church, like the sanctuary part,
Yeah.
and I wasn't really involved in all the other wonderful things that I hear people doing. Like even Goya, I think it was
Sure.
one or two meetings. I didn't do basketball, I didn't do camps, I didn't do any of that.
Wow.
So it was actually kind of fun for me because I felt that when I did go for the first time and serve at a parish, I was learning that for sort of the first time. It was like I got the chance maybe uh,
That's
to be
cool.
involved in the things that I hadn't done as a child.
And that's kind of cool, actually, because I would imagine then that you had a more maybe open-minded perspective to those programs. You know, a lot of times when people grow up in their Goyas, those memories are so specific to them that they maybe seek to replicate that specific style of Goya at every church. But as you know, it's every church, those ministries look a lot different. So in some ways, I wonder if that was maybe an advantage to you later, not being super involved from a young age, so that you could, you know, accept and serve the current model of Goya at whatever church you were at in when it was time for ministry. How interesting. So just the sanctuary and the chant stand, how those are both two very mature places for a young kid. A lot of us do the altar, but the chant stand's kind of a rarer uncharted territory for a young kid. So how did you find your way to the chant stand?
Um, I think it'll be helpful to sort of go back
Sure.
um, to sort of, I guess, my whole relationship with the church. So remember, um, my family too didn't have much of the sort of community connection to it. They weren't connected to it as a community.
Right.
Um, as much. Though I had a big Greek family, they were all restaurateurs. They weren't really going to church. They're
Working on Sundays. Yeah.
very faithful people, but yeah, working on Sundays, things like that. But I remember being younger and starting to read. And I remember being given a Bible by my godparents, sort of one of those illustrated ones, and then another one. And I think I was pretty young, maybe 5 or 6, and sort of being exposed to the message of the gospel for the first time and sort of the
Hmm.
idea that there's a God, that there's
Yeah.
sort of something bigger than life and that this life isn't all and there's life after it. And so it seemed very logical to me from like a young age that, when Christ says, if you want to follow me, pick up your cross and follow me.
Hmm.
Um, it just seemed logical to me from a young age that like, well, here's the reality that scripture is telling us. I see that there's sort of a life after this, and this life, we're supposed to do something with it in
Hmm.
response to that. Um, from a young age, I just felt like whatever I do has to be sort of all in.
Right.
So I think from when I was young, my first idea, and I remember this in second grade, was I wanted to be a missionary. I had no idea what that meant.
In
And
second
so I
grade.
just had, yeah.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
so I just had this sense that, the correct response to the gospel is somehow to go. And the only thing I could think is I'm going to go dig holes in some poor country. I thought that was somehow self-sacrificial, picking up the cross. I was like trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And so I remember being in elementary school looking for a Spanish book because I knew South America is kind of close to us in
Wow.
North America. So maybe I'll go there, I'll learn Spanish. And then when I was 14, so this is sort of a funny story. And it's fun to tell in this room I'm in right now. Right next door is the office of my proista Manos.
Oh, okay.
He's also Father Michael.
Oh, that's
And so I'm an assistant priest here.
yes.
He's he's Father Michael. He came when I was about 13 years old to this parish. So he's still here. I have
Whoa.
the blessing of working with him now, but he came when I was 13. And I remember when I was 14, because I was so convinced of whatever of that we need to respond to reality, to God's existence and the reality of the gospel, that at 14 I wanted to leave school. I wanted to quit school and go to South America. So my
Whoa.
parents, not of my own will, but my parents took me into that office right over there. And and that was a good conversation.
Yeah.
Because or maybe a conversation that sort of defined a trajectory for a little while. Because in that conversation, he said, I felt heard. I felt that, Father Michael heard me in my desire. And he
Right.
didn't sort of dispute it. But he said, you have to have tools. If you're a carpenter and you go to work on a job site and build a house, you have no hammer, you have no nails, you have nothing.
What
You
are you
need
going to
tools.
build? Yeah.
Right. So then I think that's sort of the approach that led me all the way to seminary.
Wow.
Um, because I guess I started seeing life again, and I didn't really have an inclination to the priesthood. I didn't have a particular inclination. I just wanted to figure out how we're supposed to serve God. So initially I thought it was digging holes. But then I thought, okay, maybe I should gather some more tools. I knew there was the
Yeah.
school in Boston. I knew about Hellenic College, Holy Cross. But I knew I wanted to do my undergraduate elsewhere. So I went to Ohio State, which had a good Greek department,
No
and
way.
yeah,
I didn't know
and
you
a
went
good
to Ohio State. Cool.
yeah,
Okay.
and a good music department. Because I sort of knew that if I do end up going to the seminary in Boston, knowing some Greek and working on some music would help me. So
Yeah.
so even
Gather
when
some tools from
right,
from an
right.
early
So
age,
that
gathering
I
those
think
tools.
is a very long answer to you how why the chant stand. I think I
Yeah.
saw it as a tool. I was trying to, so when I was like 13, 14, I was there trying to learn Greek, learn some of the chanting.
Wow, that's very interesting that you had the foresight to gather these tools, even though knowing that maybe the end result still might not be full priesthood, and but there's probably no two better tools to start building from an early age. And it's just interesting that most people when they go to Ohio State or like a big university, their mind's usually on, more of like a social experience or maybe joining a fraternity or something like that. And so from that early age to identify, two desirable opportunities at Ohio State and then take advantage of them. And then I think for it to come full circle, because I saw in your bio that you're now teaching Greek at HCHC. It's very cool. There's a big full circle factor here already, between, and we'll get into more of it later with the church that you're at now and with Father Michael next door. But just very interesting, and those are tools that I know I still strive to develop and build today. So it's very cool to hear from someone who did it from such a young age and in a very effective way.
All tools are good.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
man. So you're at Ohio State, you're taking the Greek, and then you took voice classes, I assume, or
Yeah,
singing
my
classes?
major was vocal performance. So like
Whoa.
classical singing, opera, things like that.
Okay, very interesting. And then so while you're going to Ohio State, what's the thought process like? Is it I know seminaries after this, or let's see what happens after Ohio State, or where are you at in these days?
Yeah. I think I knew like before I enrolled as a freshman in the undergraduate that I wanted to go to seminary. Not
Okay.
not to become a priest, but I knew that that was going to be sort of part of a necessary thing to do.
Yeah.
Again, gathering the tools, I needed to learn more about our church, right?
Yeah.
So sort of the educating, I wanted to learn about Orthodoxy, Orthodox history, all this stuff. So for me, yeah, the undergraduate was sort of just like a in between step,
Sure.
um, a valuable one, but yeah, always I had in my mind sort of what would happen next. I didn't ever imagine I would become an opera singer, which was a funny thing to be
Right.
in a music school. Most people are very passionate, right? When they're studying music,
Oh,
going to do this, you're really dedicated. And I was curious, but I don't know that I was as dedicated as my schoolmates.
definitely. No, I can see that. Yeah, as they're all, on the way to Broadway or wherever their talents took them. That's interesting. And I like your very methodical, you have like you know, the long game in mind, shall we say. Like you have goals and you took steps, years in advance to successfully arrive at your goals and then to keep building those throughout your entire ministry and life, really. This is very interesting, and now it makes sense because I remember you at the seminary. You were a senior, I believe, when I was a freshman, and you were that guy at the chant stand always. There are chant group leaders for those of you watching that have the younger students around them chanting. And my first vivid memories of going to the services in the chapel, where some of the most beautiful services you'll hear in the country, it was always you at the chant stand, and everyone was learning from you and gathered around you. So now it's interesting. It makes sense to see how you kind of came to be in such a position like that. And actually, I remember one story about you and your chanting and practicing chanting. I might not have it right. I think one of our classmates shared it with me, but you were living in married student housing at the time. And for those of you watching, the walls are very thin in the housing units at the seminary, and you can hear voices and people talking quite often. People have small children, and bedtime is very important, as you parents know. And I heard, Father Michael, I've never talked to you about this, but you were living next to one of these families with small children, but you still had to practice your Byzantine chant. And so you did so in your own closet of your unit. You would go into the closet and practice your chanting. Is that true?
Yes, yeah. There's things you can do when you're married but without children, and I guess, yeah, I was still, my wife let me sort of go in the closet and hide, but it's not such a sort of virtuous act. The person above me was a better chanter, so I just was trying to save myself from
That's all
embarrassment.
it was. That's funny. That's awesome, man. Okay, so you're now you're going through Ohio State. Seminary's next. So what are first impressions like at the seminary as you arrive there in Brookline?
There's two things I loved about the seminary. The one is, remember, like I said, I wasn't exposed to sort of the world. I knew my parish. I knew
Yes.
our uh, sanctuary there. That's what I knew, our chant
Yeah.
stand. So going there, and the first thing that made an impression on me and on my, at that time, fiance, was how many people already knew each other
Oh.
because of the camps,
Oh.
but then also sort of the great diversity just of personalities, which was what was nice to see about that is there was so many different personalities and sort of paths. Some people had a career, started careers,
Hmm.
right? Some people were married, some people were single, some people had been in Hellenic and now we're at the seminary.
Right.
Um, but and I think this is, I mean, I'm so thankful for this, and I think it's important for all of us to keep at the front of our mind as we continue in our ministry together, the people from the seminary. I think everyone just looking around and realize everyone's there because they want to serve Christ. They want to give their life to Christ somehow.
Right.
So that really felt like home because that's what I'd been trying to figure out what that looks like since I
Oh.
was little. So that was my first and lasting impression that it's a beautiful place for that reason. There's one
Right.
reason, which is everyone's there to serve Christ. And then, at least for me, it's maybe not like this for everyone. I know some people were already starting families there, had families. But
Hmm.
for me, it was, I remember telling a professor, Father, I wish that there was sort of an island where I could go to and just really focus on learning things that will make me effective in ministry.
Hmm.
And he said, well, this is that island.
Yeah.
And of course learning continues. But it's a precious time, and obviously the chapel, I think, goes without saying the most important sort of thing that's happening there, where our exterior efforts, right, are we're trying to remain connected to our hearts there.
Definitely. Yeah. In the classroom, they would say it there, and I'm sure you would agree, it was the most important classroom of all, right? That's where, you apply the things that you're learning in your chant classes and all the theology we're studying. We're singing the hymns and celebrating the services that mark those, foundational events and feasts in the church that we learn about. So the chapel, it was the most important classroom of all. And it's interesting that, it sounds like you really took full advantage of all the opportunities that the seminary has. Different guys go in with different, we all have different fortes, different areas of particular interest that we might study more than others, but it seems like you really took the largest approach possible, which is very cool. And I think that's probably maybe what has been able to help you go back and kind of return the favor, so to speak, in the form of now you're teaching a class at the seminary. I just learned that
I
from your biography. So what is that like?
I was teaching. I was teaching
Okay.
from 2020 till 2023. I was teaching modern Greek.
No way.
Um, for me, Greek always was also a tool.
Yeah.
And so I thought, not everyone's coming. I mean, I happen to come from sort of a Greek parish, but I didn't know Greek growing up. I started really learning it when I was 18.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you didn't have it like just from the house. Like
No.
I was going to ask you, because that's interesting to come to the level of teaching it. I mean, shows mastery of the language, which I didn't speak it in the house either. I did apply myself at the seminary. I got a very good understanding, but mine is far
Mhm.
from perfect, far from fluent. I still enjoy it
Yeah.
very much. What I do have, but that's interesting that you did grow up without it. So it really was from the classroom then, yes?
Yes, but the classroom for me was at Ohio State. My undergraduate was a modern
Ah,
Greek studies. So when
that's
I
right.
got to the seminary, I didn't have any Greek classes to take. I sort of tested out of
Test it
them.
out.
But
Yeah,
my Greek wasn't what I wanted it to be. It was all theoretical. So I had to
sure.
figure out ways to learn it. But going back, I also saw and still see Greek as a tool more than sort of an identity. And so
Yes.
that was why what I would try teaching at Holy Cross. I think it's important for the students to realize you're learning this. You might be from a Greek parish, you might not, you might master it perfectly, you might not,
Hmm.
but it can connect you to orthodoxy in other places. It can sort of open doors, right?
Right.
You can hear or read what's going on in the Church of Greece or at the Patriarchate. If you learned another language, that would be equally good. You learn
Right.
Arabic, you're gonna see the Orthodox Christian world from a light that I wish I saw it from, but I don't know Arabic.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And then so what was it like taking your Greek and moving to Thessaloniki there for a bit? Was it daunting going there?
Um, no, by then, so we went to Thessaloniki long after seminary.
Okay.
So after the seminary, I went to my first parish assignment, which was about 45 minutes from where I grew up. I was an
Okay.
assistant priest there, and I was there for 6 years. Um, some of which, the first two, I was just full-time priest, and then I got a blessing from our metropolitan to go to a master's in classics because I wanted to understand the ancient Greek better.
Yes.
So I did that while being in a parish. They were gracious enough to sort of support that.
Nice.
And then we wound up in Greece, which is sort of the beginning of another story. Um,
Okay, sure.
there.
Definitely, and that's an interesting one to get to. But you spent 6 years at that first parish right after seminary,
Mhm.
which is I mean, 6 years is a full experience of ministry. I would say at one parish, you'll know the parish inside and out by then. What was that experience like, and how did it, going from the kid growing up in the church, knowing he wanted to serve the church, thinking more about missions work, but then becoming the priest. And maybe we should go back there a little bit to see what the road was like between seminary and ordination. And yeah, what did that time of your life look
Yeah,
like?
yeah. So the seminary and ordination. So I went to seminary, right? I had my spiritual father there, and so I started out with a very specific idea. We have to be all in our life for Christ. I was trying to figure out what that would look like. Okay.
I
So
like how
that
you
took,
say that, by the way. That's a good, being all in is a good, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So it took different forms. First, it was go dig holes somewhere, mission work. And then,
Yes.
getting older, high school, hearing about Manos, and my dad had gone as a Protestant and
Oh,
seeing
wow.
the, then I thought, well, that's a pretty all-in life. Maybe I want that.
It's about
Um,
as all in as it gets over there.
right.
Yeah,
Which I don't think is atypical of like a sort of a high school boy to
sure.
be attracted to these things. At the same time, though, I met my wife when I was 15. And so I didn't know. I knew that if we were to be married, probably I wouldn't be a missionary, and definitely I
Right.
wouldn't be monastic.
Right.
And
Right.
so then I went to the seminary, sort of letting God guide it, but having been so impressed by Father Michael, who I'm working with now, by
Yeah.
his example, I think he's the one who made me sort of realize, a parish priest can be all in. And now
Yes.
I would even, it's sort of opened up. Um, I think all of us are supposed to be all in. It's not a priesthood thing. So yeah, I think I started out with a specific idea, missionary, monks, priesthood, and now you could be a postman. And the
Yeah.
point is to sort of is to love God and to try to follow Christ and grow through all the ways he offers us to do so. So anyway, I'd arrived to that sort of I could be a priest, I could be a postman, it doesn't matter. That
Hmm.
spot, I think at the end of seminary. That's sort of what I was feeling. I feel it now as well. Or
Sure.
professor, because I'd saw some sort of clergy professors at the seminary, right?
Sure.
Um, and so then it was essentially the direction of it was from the outside in, it was sort of the direction of my mentors, my spiritual father. Um, and so I sort of happily submitted to it, I guess.
Sure.
That that okay, I'll go down this door, and I remember something very helpful when we feel in life like we have all these doors in front of us.
Yeah.
Um, I remember my spiritual father telling me, if you go in this door, which is the door to be a priest, or this door, which is the door to be a professor, or whatever it is, God's going to follow you through whichever one you went to. You
Hmm.
go in. He's not going to leave you, right? Wrong door,
Yeah,
you
of
chose the
course.
wrong door.
Yeah,
So
wrong door. Game's over. Yeah, yeah,
it's over.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's sort of how my ordination happened. At the end of seminary, I'd gone through it. My spiritual father said, "You wouldn't have gone through all this, um, and sort of made it out, if you weren't someone to whom the priesthood is calling."
Right.
So in trust, I was ordained and enjoy. Yeah.
Of course, of course. And was your spiritual father, was this someone at the school? Was this just another
At the
priest?
time, right, at the time it was someone at the school, who, yeah, who I love and revere. Yeah.
I think I mean, they had a program. We would all pick a spiritual father while
Right.
we were there. And I think that this is probably the most like beautiful example of that relationship between like a spiritual father and a spiritual son, especially one that's a seminarian. Sounds like he was helping you think through the process, not like, hey, he has the right answer the whole time and he's just going to tell you what you should do, but helping you learn and grow and arrive to the very important decision in a way that you knew was probably the best form for your life to take and for your vocation to begin. So that's pretty cool to hear that story about how you did come to, how many years later would that have been then? If 14 you were ready to hit the road and go do the missionary work, and then to
Yeah.
like
It was about
culminate.
10 or 11 years later. I think I was 25 when I was ordained.
There you go. So it's
Um,
quite yeah.
yeah, so that's how I was ordained. I sort of accepted it. We went after graduation, my wife at the time and I went to Greece, went to our sort of village, and we were
What
there and
village would that be?
we it's the nearest city is called Karpenisi.
Oh, down by Karpenisi. Okay.
Yeah, it's in the mountains there. So yeah, so we were there, and then we got a call from Metropolitan Nicholas of Detroit, and we sort of received our assignment.
Very nice. Were you just taking this was in the summer after you had graduated and
Right, right.
okay, cool. And so you were just spending that summer in Greece and then Metropolitan Nicholas and calls you go back and it's time for ordained ministry in the metropolis of Detroit. Very nice.
Right. Yeah,
So
yeah.
in your 6 years there, what how did ordained ministry play out in ways you had anticipated? How was it maybe a little different than you had thought? It sounds like you're very well prepared in many aspects. And so I'm just curious, having, all the various tools that you've acquired over the years, would you say you were 100% ready for parish ministry, or were there still things that you were learning on the fly at the time?
No, of course, I don't think we're ever ready, right? I mean, we can be
Right.
ready to be a priest to sort of fulfill the functions.
Yes.
We can learn how to do a baptism and how to, I don't know, interact with people. But I, yeah, the blessing for me, I was there 6 years, is
Hmm.
that I worked with three different priests at that time.
Whoa.
When I came, my Manos was towards the end of he was close to retirement.
Sure.
So we had about 2 years together, which was a blessing.
Hmm.
Um, and then another priest came sort of in the interim,
Hmm.
uh, who had a different background. He'd been a chaplain, so a totally different sort of background.
Yeah.
And then another priest came who'd been in the mission field, and this will sort of lead to the next chapter in our life.
Interesting.
Um, but so three very different priests.
Yeah.
And I had sort of the blessing of not having the stress of being sort of proistamenos. Um,
Isn't it nice, kind of? I mean, we will
yeah.
just, I mean, it is nice that you can fully serve Christ, you can do all of his work, but in the Prost Dominos role, the buck stops with them, shall we say. And those are some tough calls, and it is nice to be able to, shall we say, redirect people with these kind of serious inquiries or situations, and then to see how the Prost Dominos takes it on. I know that's something. I'm a pastoral assistant myself, and
Mhm.
although it's a pastoral assistant, is a very interesting role that has its challenges. For me, in my phase of life, that's one of the best perks of it, is passing that buck to the proistamenos, and seeing how to
Right,
resolve certain things like this. So that is interesting. Yeah.
right. There may be a time you have to pick up the cross of sort of decision making, but
Yeah.
if you don't have to, I don't know
You're
that there's
right.
a rush to do so.
Exactly, exactly. So you're serving as voitho, as associate pastor to these three different priests. It's three very different. You have
Yeah.
the original one on his way to retirement, so he's from a certain generation, of course. Then the chaplain and the missionary minded priest. And
Mhm.
so what was that relationship like, and how did it affect your next chapter?
Yeah. So at that time we'd had by the end of this we'd had three children. We started having kids when we were in the parish.
Cool.
And this is now going back to the Greek. So that sort of tool of Greek language, actually using it,
Uh-huh.
I really acquired it when my firstborn was born, because then I just switched only Greek at home, whatever
No
I.
way.
My wife also learned through that.
Wow.
Um, and so we had this sort of the fluency came that way, funnily enough, talking to a baby until they start talking back. But the baby grows up and then it's talking to you and you
Look
have
at
a
that.
practice
Yeah.
partner.
So this is Makarios, right? And so
Yes.
so as Makarios is growing up, obviously he's going to learn English. He lives in America. That's going to
Hmm.
happen naturally. So in the house, a lot of us, we say that we'll raise our child with like a certain language, and then it's just so easy to revert to
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
to the native tongue. But so you kept the Greek going, and lo and behold, was that his
Yeah.
first language?
Yeah. For all of them, it's been their first language.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm just weird. I just really like Greek. It's just something I like. Some people like sports. I like the Greek.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so while we're there, we're having kids, and my presbytera said, well, my most recent proistamenos, the last one to come, who had been the missionary, we'd heard him before, and I'd of course hung up the dreams of doing mission work a long time ago
Sure.
because
Yeah, because
I'm
not
not
you.
going to drag my wife, right? That's not very Christ-like, and my wife
Right.
and family somewhere just because I want it. Um,
Very true.
so so anyway, so we'd heard him on a podcast, and then we sort of find out, and this was during COVID that he came. So we find out, oh, Father so and so is coming. And we go, wait, I think we heard him on that podcast about a missionary. And then we find out, oh, he was a missionary.
No way.
Then, so then, I think that planted the seed in my wife's mind, because she saw the ages that our children were. And
Hmm.
sort of, I remember sitting on the couch at home and her saying, if we are going to do something different, because now we're going on 6 years and an assistant, there starts to be sort of um, pressure expectations that like the next thing we did was probably going to lock us in a way. We were going to be
Yeah, that
given.
Christ domino roll somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do something, we sort of have to do it now.
Yeah.
And so she brought up mission work while I had dropped it for, 10 years.
Yeah.
So that was interesting how God sort of works. And so then what we did is we said, well, we'll spend a year with this priest talking to him about it, and we'll try to decide. He ended up introducing us to active missionaries
Okay.
who were in the field. And um, and sort of immediately, one of them invited us um, to go see. So we went to go see where he was overseas, a small sort of missionary setting in a place that Christianity isn't really popular. So they had their
Sure.
challenges. That's what I'd wanted since I was little. I think my presbytera somehow wanted is to sort of take a leap into God's hands, see what it's like to be called by Him. Sort of like sell our insurance, sell our house, and
Wow.
go.
Wow. So yeah.
Well, we didn't. We rented our house and then we sold it. But
Okay. Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so we went with our 3 kids overseas. We spent a summer in this missionary setting, and then we came back and we sort of rented our house and packed up to go more permanently.
Oh wow. Okay, so now
Yeah.
let me ask some clarifying questions here because I have to admit, I have grown up in the church my entire life. I have zero mission experience. I have really zero knowledge of what basically missionary work looks like. I know what mission parishes in America look like. My dad started one, completed one. But missionary work in a non-Orthodox country is something that I'm just totally blind to, I will admit. And so was this your first foray into ministry work that summer that you'd gone for those couple months?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it all depends on the setting and the needs of the people and the bishops under whom you're serving. So
Okay.
so our setting was a small place where there were very few Christians who wouldn't sort of be able to share their Christianity.
Right.
Um, and so just in a quiet way, we served with this bishop who was there and had built a small chapel, and people would sort of come out of the woodwork um, to appear at liturgy.
Look at
And
that.
yeah, so what the only thing I was offering was a liturgy, which felt good. Maybe it explains
Okay.
ordination. Maybe that was the tool I was sort of missing. Some people will be a doctor and you're going to offer something different, or a teacher.
Oh,
Um,
right. Just doctors and teachers do
right,
missionary work. Geez, I've never
right,
even really connected these dots.
right. So the only thing I really offered was being able to do liturgy. They didn't. It's essentially we were willing to go to this place.
I see.
That's all we did, but we were very inspired by that. And we liked that idea of, if we take some risks, it seems like God helps us. God sort of gives grace when we need it.
Right.
I don't think He abandons us. So, so we were inspired by that. Anyway, as we're getting ready, and in fact had left the country to go, we landed in Greece as an intermediary
Sure.
stage, and um, and then we're waiting to go back. Eventually, the mission had to stop. God allowed it to stop. What was
Okay.
happening where we had been, and so then we found ourselves in Greece.
Okay.
And at the same time, there was opportunity there because I'd done this master's, because I'd been teaching at Holy Cross Hellenic College.
Yeah.
I got a blessing from here, the Archdiocese, to pursue a doctorate. So being in Greece, I went to Thessaloniki, the Aristotle University, and I started a doctorate there. And our kids were there in school, just public school. We were in a nice
Oh, public
neighborhood.
school in Greece?
Yeah, But
That's
I guess
amazing.
this is how God does it, because their first language was Greece. We
That
wouldn't have
is
been able to
truly
do it,
amazing.
right? It was Greek.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we were there, and I was blessed to sort of be hosted and allowed to serve and help in small ways at a parish called Saint Theraponda in
That happened.
Thessaloniki.
Okay.
Saint Theraponda, which was a
Is that in the
different
city, in the city proper, in the metropolis of Thessaloniki there?
it's technically in Thessaloniki, but it's not in the metropolis, but it's not
Oh.
downtown. It's in a neighborhood. It's actually in the most densely populated neighborhood of
Whoa.
Thessaloniki. It's called Katotumba. It's where the like
Oh, yeah.
the PAOK soccer
Stadium.
stadium is there, right? So
Yeah.
so they had already three priests there, the Proistamos being the chancellor. And
Oh,
so I think it was helpful just to have an extra pair of hands in the parish communion and things like this,
definitely.
because he had his duties as a chancellor, and the parish, has 60,000 people technically, which equals a couple thousand on a big feast.
Couple
So yeah,
thousand people?
yeah, yeah.
That
Pascha
so
they did for the resurrection service. They did a drone once, and I think they saw that 30,000 people, like they sort of did the counting or estimating 30,000 people had come out of their houses. But remember, a parish in Greece in a city like that is they just draw a line. It's almost like we would draw a line around a subdivision or something. And
oh,
because Greece is what it is and has the history it is, most of the people in there are going to be Orthodox Christians. Now,
yes, yeah.
now how involved they are in the church, how often they go throughout their lives, that's different. That doesn't mean we had 60,000 people there every Sunday,
Well, sure, of
but
course. Yeah.
it was a big, a bigger thing, a different
So you
sort of ministry.
so you spent Holy Weeks there, obviously. You said
Mhm.
30,000 people on Pascha, and those services, Holy Week is can be a bit taxing for any parish priest. And I imagine in a church like that, you're doing every service possible. And not only are you doing every service, but there's hundreds, if not thousands of people at every single service. Is that stressful? Is that nerve-wracking at all? Or since you've done Holy Week so many times and these services, is it just something that you innately are able to you just when the service starts, you're in the zone, shall we say? Or is it daunting when you look out and there's thousands of people out there?
Yeah. Well, you're not alone. You're not alone. The church in Greece, at least as I experienced it there, it's different on a small island and a small village, but in the city is like a big rushing river.
Yeah.
Like, yes, I was a priest. How many priests? There's 117 or something in the metropolis of Thessaloniki. I don't know the number.
Yeah.
Uh, how many faithful? You looked at our chant stand, we would have our head chanter, but they would have 20 students around them.
Wow.
So, and in the altar, yes, like we have things to do during Holy Week, but you have like a neo coro we had, sort of the
Oh,
chaplain, who knows way more than I'll ever know about um decorating and preparing things for service. I mean, this is his full-time job.
I see.
So that's it's just a river. It's a
Gotcha.
river. And I think that the funny thing I learned, and I'd felt it about 6 months after living in Greece and serving at this parish, is I looked back at our church here in America, and I thought, this is the mission field.
It is.
because because and I'm not talking just about old people who are banging down the doors to learn about orthodoxy, um, but I'm talking about there's no rushing river. This here feels more to me like our mission work,
So
where
true.
sort of every priest, every pastoral assistant, every family, every faithful person has to be sort of drawing on God, and his grace sort of directly to just even be here. And there's practical ways we can sort of learn to do this and make a small river, right? We have our parishes, we have
Yeah.
our feasts and things like that, but it's sort of a desert, and I think God sends manna in the desert, right?
Yes.
And welcome to Greece, we have all this whole banquet of
Yeah.
things. Really interesting sort of transformation in my own head.
That is interesting because you've had the three different experiences. You've had orthodoxy in an Orthodox country. You've had orthodoxy in a non-Orthodox country with missions work, and then you have orthodoxy. And how would you even describe America? A neutral country, right? Where certainly we're not an orthodoxy, freedom of all religions. But and it's not necessarily it's not overtly anti-Orthodox or pro-Orthodox. It is what it is. And so our experience in America is, I suppose, what we make it, right? We have that much more, there's a lot more responsibility on our side as the people of the church to kind of affect those rivers and how well they flow, which does mirror mission work so well that it's very interesting. And then in Greece, you plugged into your role. The Neokoros has his role. I'm sure the ladies of the parishes would bring all the flowers and everything like that. That is very interesting. Now, how long did you spend in Thessaloniki?
We were there a total of about 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Yeah, from the point that our kids were enrolled in school and I was in the parish, 2.5 years.
So 2.5 years, I mean, that's enough time to settle into routine to have, a full life cycle there. Was there any temptation or idea to stay permanently and just be a priest in Thessaloniki, and what
Yeah.
was the thought process like there?
Yeah. So after about 2 years, I thought to myself, as I saw our kids growing up and starting to put down roots there, have friends.
Yeah.
And of course, as parents, you're thinking about that, sort of the timing. Our eldest at that point was like gonna turn 8, and he had friends at school. And so we saw the roots starting to go down.
Yeah.
And that sort of prompted me to say, well, why are we here? Should we stay here? And so I called the bishop under whom we'd initially gone for mission work to do.
Sure.
And I said, but why are we here? Why are we here? Are we going to do something? Because like I said, it had stopped. Um, it's now in God's hands,
Yeah.
sort of thing. Um, and before I could ask the question, are we going to do a mission? He goes, Father, come here, come to this island. I want you to be the priest here. You're going to support the people, blah, blah, blah. So he had continued um, his own sort of response to God's call in his life. And he was the guy who just leaves and digs holes. He's a bishop, a monastic.
Oh,
He had holy examples of uh, of ministry that had formed him. And so anyway, so I went to this island, I visited it, I visited with my family. We really considered going to what he'd called sort of the second part of the mission
oh,
in a different place, a different location, different country. And this is where I think my wife and I just had to accept the reality that sometimes God gives us blessings and opportunities that maybe we just don't have the strength to take.
that's
So
very true. Very well put.
so we did not, and there's more to this story, but um we we just uprooted our kids and they just started putting down roots after 2.5 years.
Yeah.
We didn't want to do it again because this was almost even more of a culture shock than going from America to Greece.
Sure.
So um so then we started thinking, well, okay, then it's time to make a decision where to settle.
Yeah.
Um if God allows us to settle. And so I called the metropolis of Detroit, and our metropolitan has always been Metropolitan Nicholas so patient with me. And one thing I really appreciate about him is I think he takes seriously sort of the role of a father. And sometimes a father lets you have to give your kids freedom at some point when
Of
they're
course.
older, right? Otherwise they're going to rebel. You're 18 years old and your parents are telling you right
Yeah.
exactly what.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so so he sort of I asked if we could return, told him we were thinking about returning, and then I found out that there was an opening at the parish I'd grown up in
Look at
here
that.
in Assumption. And and that was such a blessing because our kids have 4 living grandparents. They're all here.
Amazing.
And And so if we're going to leave the sort of beautiful life we had there in Greece, it had to be to leave it for something good in a way,
Yes.
something
Yes.
at least equally as beautiful. And I feel this is to be able to serve here at this parish, to help and continue to learn from the priest who'd been my priest in formative years,
Yeah.
and then and to have our kids grow up with the sense of um, having family around other than just mom and dad and
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah.
But having close cousins, not distant cousins, and having grandparents.
Yeah, no, it is like you said, it's an equally um beautiful position to be in. I really liked what you said that, God presents us with opportunities or possibilities that we might not always have the strength to take, because I think the natural inclination is to always jump for that the little challenge, the maybe the unknown, the foray, especially, into a field that you'd always been interested in. And sometimes we get down on ourselves, maybe if we, everyone uses the word regret, right? Maybe do we regret not taking these risks or these opportunities? But I think it's very inspiring the way that you worked through that, um, and were able to, without regrets, I assume, I don't want to speak for you, but without regret, to maybe close a door for once instead of walking through it, and returning to a very beautiful chapter where you find yourself now back in your home parish, which is just crazy to me because obviously you're the same person you were back then, but you've lived so many different lives. It seems like, since being that 14-year-old kid growing up in that parish. So what is it like, being all over the world, studying so deeply into so many different fields, and then coming back to the parish where it all started? What's that like?
Um, yeah, I think maybe I'm really grateful to God for this. I think that maybe I'm someone who would always assume a place is an answer, a position is an answer, being around a certain person is an answer. And so I think God let me have sort of all the things that I mean, I remember at seminary, the thought crossing my mind of it would be nice to teach here one day.
Oh
And
yeah.
the fact that I wanted to be a missionary when I was younger, and then my wife brings it up,
Yeah.
sort of out of the blue later, and then we have this connection. And then the fact that I wanted to do studies, and I thought about being a priest professor, whatever that means. And then I had the chance to continue my studies. What I sort of feel in all of that is, yeah, none of that is actually the solution. There's not sort of a right place. If we want to be dedicated to God, it's all just, I mean, we do it where we are, wherever we are, right?
Right. Right.
So there you are, um, and here I am, and you know, that full dedication that I wanted as a little kid and thought I had to be a missionary, had to be a monk, had to be a priest, had to. It's not
Mhm.
that. It's all of us are called, right? How many
Yes.
people have sort of sanctified their lives and given their lives to Christ, doing things that have nothing to do exteriorly with sort of the church or ministry.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's sort of how I feel now. Though I'm a priest, and it's wonderful to be here, I I just realized that it's not going to make a difference, sort of the exterior stuff. I'm just trying to get my heart and trying to become a kid again
Yeah.
that does things, that wants to find the truth, that wants to serve God in response to his love, rather than sort of looking outside for formulas or positions that will
Yeah.
lead to something. So I feel, funnily enough, I love how you put it, closing a door for once instead of walking
Mhm.
through it. I feel like we were eventually, yeah, I feel very good closing it. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't, my thinking, I could be wrong, but it doesn't really matter. I could have stayed here
It's
the
so,
whole time, right?
yeah.
We
Yeah.
could still be in Greece.
Yeah.
These things are not the answer. God is what we're looking for.
That's
So
so
yeah.
simple, and it's so true. It doesn't really matter. All the, the locations we want to do certain things, and the positions we want to achieve and stuff like that. It doesn't really matter, because when you are all in, like you are, then that connection with God is strong and is real, and you'll be serving him the best way possible, despite location, despite positions and things like that. So that's very cool. And I like how you just simply said it doesn't really matter. So yeah, we can all kind of just relax a little bit from time to time. And everyone in any field, I think, that next promotion, that maybe that next company everyone
Right.
wants to work for. Yeah, we are still who we are despite, the exterior things, and it's God that helps us remember that.
Yeah.
Now, something I've been very excited to ask you, because I can't ask just any guest. And this is just as FYI for anyone who might be watching. Father Michael Manos was probably the most shredded guy at the entire seminary. Just like everyone would ask you for workout advice, you were a machine. And I want to ask you, what are the parallels to like an active, fit lifestyle and the spiritual life? And what is your own personal connection with fitness? And how did you come to get so into it? Because it's interesting. You said you weren't really into sports, but I just maybe assumed you were like a former athlete. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So what is your personal kind of like fitness journey?
Yeah. Well, I say all this aware in my own self that anything can become an idol, including health and fitness. Okay. But
Yeah.
um, so this is sort of another part of a story that's usually not connected to the church.
Yeah.
But so when I was at Ohio State, yeah, I'd done exercise. I'd swam in
Okay.
high school quite seriously. I didn't continue anything in college, but when I was in college, when I was like 17, I watched the Cirque du Soleil. I really liked
Yeah.
handstands, these things. Then I
Oh,
heard there was a parkour club at Ohio State.
was
Parkour
it
is the
really?
free run.
Yeah.
And
Parkour.
not just that. So I said I'm going to go and I'm going to sort of learn to do a flip off a wall and just something cool to learn when I'm 18. And
Yeah.
what I found, those people who had started that club had actually, in wisdom, reached out to the people who started parkour, that first generation of French people
Oh,
who had started it in the 80s. And they would come and train with us. So they would
the
sort of,
original.
and yeah, and so what I was shocked to find, and this was sort of the other thing that consumed me during my college years, is that their practice of this, what seems like a crazy sport and often is if you do it the wrong way,
Yeah.
of testing your limits and doing a jump, breaking a jump that you're afraid of, these sort of things. It was all a philosophical thing for them.
Huh.
Their parents, this first generation, their parents had been firefighters and they were trying to become useful human beings. And so they knew that they had to sort of know their abilities, know fear, know when to listen to it, know when not to listen to it. They're very
Interesting.
philosophical people. And um, so anyway, so I trained with them for a long time, even in the seminary, actually, worked as a parkour coach for the first year or two.
Did you really?
Um, yeah, but it was for me, I guess maybe it's all part of this journey. Parkour is about asking sort of who you are. And sometimes you have to, be facing something and you have to have a why you're jumping. And sometimes you will have a reason that you're jumping and you're going to do it because it's that important. Other
Yeah.
times you're going to not have a reason. You're going to say, I'm actually not going to do this because of whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, my exercise at the seminary was all that stuff, gymnastic type things. And of course our spiritual life is a life of exercise. And in
Yeah.
fact, I think exercise, I would train parkour for 6 hours a day. I think that's a lot easier than certainly some of the things we read in the life of the saints, the history of our ascetic tradition. So, that idea of having sort of control or trying to have control, which we'll never have without God's grace, but at
Yeah.
least putting in our part of the effort is something we have in sports training and
Yeah.
also something that I think is equally, if not more present in the spiritual life, in our own sort of small uh, ascetic gifts that we're giving to God to just try to show Him, help us. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. And then because if I'm if I'm not mistaken, you're also quite the dietary master as well. And I don't know if anyone ever shared this with you, but you had gone on the senior trip with some people, and as is custom, when you're being hosted by I don't know if it was at a monastery or maybe just like an audience with a metropolitan somewhere. When you're hosted places, they'll come bring you little treats like lukumi or candies and stuff like that. And I guess at one of these places, everyone in the pilgrimage group from the school was offered like a very rich chocolate type of candy or something like that. And someone said, I don't even know if this is true. So you can you can affirm or yeah, affirm if this is true, but you, of course, being gracious, you accepted the treat and you have to eat it because, you just want to show that you're grateful for the hospitality, and that you actually got violently ill from eating this treat because your body was so not used to eating like garbage, shall we say, or like unhealthy
Yeah.
things. And so is this true, I guess, is my first question. Then the second question is, what is your dietary approach? Like, what is your mindset when it comes to diet and things like that?
Yeah. I was very disciplined, but of course you can be disciplined for bad reasons,
Yeah.
man, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was very disciplined in my diet then. And it's true. In fact, I got really sick, went to the hospital. They
Oh,
were trying to
wow.
schedule a surgery to remove a part of my whatever's in your stomach there.
Whoa.
And but I didn't want to have surgery on the senior or the St. Helens pilgrimage.
Yeah.
So instead, I found that eating beet salads, I would have 2 beet salads a day, helped me avoid the surgery. Everything got sort
No,
of fixed.
no
So
way.
yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I for me, I mean that's sort of a personal confession. Sort of uh my main focus now is avoiding the temptation to turn sort of our fasting into a diet, to do it for
Oh,
the wrong reasons, this sort of thing. Um,
yeah.
so I have to walk that line carefully with my spiritual father. Um, but St. John Cassian, he says it's very simple. He says to never eat, always stop eating when you're still hungry, and never eat until you're full. He says this is a good general rule. So we
St.
have the
John
traditions.
Cassian?
Yeah, yeah. But so he talks, of course, we know the traditions, the fasting traditions. And I think we should use tradition because it's given to us. But there's also that sort of general rule he makes, like if I could do a one line and sum it all up. So that alone is enough. Is a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I
Um,
know that is, and that's funny that line from St. John Cassian, that line could be
yeah,
on any, popular diet book in America right
right,
now. So, how
right,
did you
right.
say? How did you put it again?
He says, always stop eating while still hungry, and never eat until you're full.
Yeah, that's
So
beautiful.
yeah, that's his. He has a couple pages on the 8 vices and gluttony, and so
Ah,
that's his thing. So yeah, diet's good, but for me, I need it to be done for the right reasons, right? Our
yeah.
discipline should just be love notes that we're writing to God and asking for His grace, not some other thing, sense of accomplishment on our own strength. Yeah,
Yeah, well put. And it's very cool to be able to understand and apply all these kind of modern I don't know, things that have become entire industries, right? Health and fitness has
right,
become an industry. Self, wellness, diet, it's become an industry, and these are things that to us are just things that have always supposed to have been a part of a well-rounded life spiritually, physically, and
right,
so we don't need to blow them out of proportion in a way that we're supporting industries making money off of people, perhaps. I mean, there's industries that do it in the right way, but things can definitely be taken out of proportion, and we need to look no further than our own church for the answer to all these things that
right.
support.
Yeah, funnily enough,
Yeah.
like you said, a lot of the church advice could be a new diet. You might see it in diet things. Even intermittent fasting is not, holding the ninth hour, not eating till 3 p.m.
Oh
That's been
yeah.
long part of our fasting tradition.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
yeah, it's funny. It's funny. Thank God. Thank God. The wisdom we science catches up, something like that, is some
Yeah,
of the church.
definitely, definitely. Well, Father, it's been a real treat to sit down with you to catch up, learn about your path. I'm sure you will have inspired many of the people that are watching in their own spiritual lives. And then perhaps though for those of our guests watching who wonder about the priesthood one day or serving Christ or maybe missionary work, what kind of advice might you offer someone who was thinking the things that you were thinking at 14 years old?
Um, I think the first thing to do is to be like, right, the Theotokos, and just to be here. Yenitomi katatorimas. May it happen to me according to your word. There has to be that um approach. So I think it's good to not lock on to things. Um, Again, I'm guilty of locking onto things and thinking they're going to be the answer. I think it's good to
Sure.
not do that. God, the best life is one that God has guided for us, and He'll guide
Yes.
it as much as we let Him guide it. So I
Yeah.
would say to have the openness to God's will and just figure out the best thing to do in the meantime, in a way, like
Yeah.
going back to the sort of gathering tools, right? You find it can be helpful where you are. You're doing this podcast, right? You're
Yeah.
finding ways to serve God where you are,
Right.
and then all of it will be, I think, unraveled in retrospect. You'll see how it
Definitely.
happens, how God guides us. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Father Michael. I enjoyed very much catching up with you. I know everybody else watching did as well. And we look forward to welcoming everyone back for the next episode of Path of the Priesthood. And Father Michael, we wish you many more blessed years of ministry in Christ Church, wherever that may be for you in your life.
Okay, thank you, Christo. I hope at some point it means my paths cross with you, so I can see you in
That
person.
would that
God
would be
bless.
awesome, man. That would be hopefully in Thessaloniki. We'll go for a cafe and
Sounds good.
yeah, that would be a treat. All right, thank you, everybody. We will see you next time.